A global summit in the mountains, lockdowns sealed off and already falling apart. Before Air Force One even touched down, Carney scrapped the G7 communiqué, refused the handshake photo, and signaled to the world, this isn't diplomacy, it's a warning. Trump arrived demanding 5% military budgets, fresh tariffs, and even floated annexing Canada. Macron detoured to Greenland to throw it in his face. Japan's filing with the WTO. Mexico came armed with legal shields, and behind the scenes the United States is being blamed for destabilizing the entire global economy. This was supposed to be a G7, but what's unfolding in Alberta looks more like the end of it. Prime Minister Mark Carney stunned world leaders by killing the G7's closing communiqué before talks even began. Something no host has done since 1975. According to Reuters, the decision blindsided both the White House and European delegations, stripping the summit of its usual symbol of policy unity. Carney's aides told Bloomberg the choice was deliberate, a signal that Canada won't participate in legitimizing United States trade coercion after Trump's 10% universal tariff announcement, which now affects over $1.1 trillion in imports from allies. The communiqué typically outlines coordinated steps on trade security and climate, but Carney replaced it with a sterile chair summary, a diplomatic void. Macron's team called the move unprecedented, while a German delegate described it as tactical silence, not disorganization. And with no official agreement, Trump leaves Canada without any document he can wave as validation. But the bigger question remains, did Carney just redefine resistance in G7 diplomacy? In a March 2025 campaign event in Ohio, Trump stated, Canada should have been part of the United States from the start, sparking outrage in Ottawa and drawing condemnation from former Canadian defense chiefs. But the rhetoric has teeth. The United States ran a $38.6 billion goods trade deficit with Canada last year, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And Trump has responded with sector-specific tariffs on Canadian dairy at 22%, aluminum at 10%, and lumber at 14%. Bloomberg reports those duties have already cost Canada's manufacturing sector $4.2 billion in the first quarter of 2025 alone. Behind closed doors, Carney's trade team has been negotiating in Washington to preserve access for high V-value exports like critical minerals and clean tech, both of which now face regulatory hurdles under new United States economic sovereignty clauses. Former WTO negotiator Peter Clark told the Financial Post, "This isn't a trade dispute, it's a sovereignty test dressed in tariff codes. And if that's the real play, what part of Canada does Trump want next?" Macron's unannounced visit to nuke Greenland just hours before landing in Alberta wasn't accidental. It was a direct diplomatic rebuke of Trump's repeated proposals to buy the autonomous Danish territory, including a fresh suggestion made in a May 2025 Fox News interview. Greenland is not a bargaining chip, Macron told reporters, flanked by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. The timing mattered. It came amid new United States Arctic drilling permits and increased American pressure to militarize Greenland's airspace under NORAD expansion plans. European Union diplomats told Reuters the move was coordinated to preemptively corner Trump before he could bring up territorial issues at Kanonowski's. Macron's media team pushed the narrative globally. Photos, statements, symbolic handshakes, all framed as defense of democratic sovereignty. The result, before Trump could open his mouth at the G7, the narrative was already flipped against him. But did Macron just shield Europe, or did he bait Washington into overplaying its hand? This G7 summit looks less like multilateral governance and honestly more like triage. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz landed under pressure from Berlin's €17.5 billion export shortfall to the United States since Trump's tariff hike with autos hit hardest Japan's Shigeru Ishiba well. He faces scrutiny as Tokyo's $74.1 billion trade surplus triggered new threats from the U.S. Commerce Department to reopen Section 232 steel investigations. The United Kingdom's Keir Starmer, fresh off a narrow parliamentary win, managed to secure a digital trade exemption from Trump. But according to Bloomberg, it only covers 12 months and, excludes financial services. Meanwhile, Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico is navigating border policy uncertainty after DHS signaled a potential doubling of cross-border tariffs if Mexico doesn't adopt a U.S.-style asylum framework. And then there's Canada's guest, India's Narendra Modi, who is under active RCMP review for state-coordinated political violence after an alleged plot against Sikh activists surfaced in Toronto. None of these leaders arrived to build a coalition. They came to limit the damage. So who's setting the agenda when every player stuck defending their position? Carney's refusal to issue a joint G7 statement stripped Trump of a closing victory narrative. And yeah, Washington definitely noticed the World Bank's June 2025 Global Economic Prospects report attributed a 0.7% global GDP downgrade to growing uncertainty caused by U.S. tariff volatility and retaliatory measures. Canada alone has suffered $4.2 billion in retaliatory losses since January, mostly in softwood beef and battery-grade nickel, according to Statistics Canada. By releasing only a chair's summary, Carney prevented Trump from leveraging Canadian diplomacy for domestic gain on NATO. Trump's demand that allies spend 5% of GDP on defense met stiff resistance, with Carney stating bluntly, Canada will not use its federal budget as a metric of military compliance. Max Bergman of CSIS told Bloomberg, Carney's move robbed Trump of symbolic capital. No press conference, no signatures, no posturing. In a summit where every sentence is parsed for leverage, Carney didn't just mute the microphone, he controlled the room's lighting framing and, well, the final shot. The Canadian Rockies were chosen for their remoteness. But now that isolation looks honestly pretty tactical. Access roads were shut, protesters pushed over 50 miles out, and the RCMP enforced a full lockdown, the first since the 2002 G8. But this isn't about safety, it's about control. Leaders arrived to find no final document, no joint statement, and no unified message, just a vacuum. According to the AP, every G7 nation but the UK now faces US tariffs. And multiple EU officials told Reuters the summit was designed to avoid confrontation, but is fueling it instead. Yet Carney's team isn't rattled. One senior official told Bloomberg, you don't need to chase headlines when you've designed the frame, and if this silence feels deliberate, it probably is. Beneath the summit's visible friction lies a quieter tremor. U.S. trade policy is destabilizing global consensus, and Washington isn't even denying it. Max Bergman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies told Bloomberg, the G7 is supposed to be the engine of global coordination. Instead, the U.S. is now the volatility driver. Since Trump's second term began, the U.S. has imposed tariffs on $1.3 trillion in imports and revoked 6 bilateral exemptions within 90 days of renegotiation. According to the World Bank, global capital inflows dropped 12.4% in the first quarter of 2025, the sharpest quarterly contraction since early COVID-19, citing unpredictable U.S. trade retaliation as a top cause. But at Kanaskis, Trump isn't defending the numbers, he's avoiding them. His team has focused on NATO spending and sovereign leverage, while leaving economic analysts in the press corps to fill the void. And if the data speaks louder than the podium, who's really dictating the G7 narrative? At this summit, familiar allies arrived with new guardrails. France, Germany, and Italy, the EU's core trade bloc, now operate under EU-wide tariff defense mechanisms, triggering automatic retaliation if U.S. duties escalate. The bloc activated the early warning system for coordinated repricing the moment Trump floated a potential 17% levy on European machinery, per Reuters. Japan's delegation requested emergency WTO mediation over aluminum reclassification. Mexico's foreign ministry entered the summit with legal memoranda prepared in anticipation of new cross-border duty threats. And India's attendance, despite Canadian RCMP allegations of foreign-linked violence, sparked tension in sideline diplomacy. It's not a summit anymore. It's parallel crisis management, said a former Canadian G7 negotiator to the Globe and Mail. The G7's premise was multilateral consensus. Now it's nation-by-nation crisis aversion, each country playing defense, often from the country across the table. So how long before this shifts from diplomacy to damage control? What began as an elite economic forum in 1975 has become a stage for geopolitical fragmentation, held together more by habit than harmony. The G7's founding purpose was to coordinate economic recovery and defend shared rules. But with Trump's push to annex Greenland and Canada, his tariff-first agenda, and a refusal to reaffirm climate or security frameworks, those rules are unraveling. Carney's rejection of the joint communiqué marks the second time in 7 years the Canadian Prime Minister refused to endorse unity under Trump. But this time, it's not a protest. It's a recalibration. According to AFP, several G7 diplomats now refer to the summit as a legacy construct, useful for optics, but no longer a policy anchor. If the host won't sign it, the guest ignores it, and the rest quietly hedge against both. What exactly is left to defend? Or is the G7 now just a mirror reflecting a world that stopped pretending to agree? So where does this leave us? With a summit built on consensus now cracking under contradiction, with a chair who refused to close the meeting and a president who might have blown the doors off the institution instead. But this wasn't the climax. It was the warning shot. Because if Carney's silent defiance reshaped diplomacy, wait until NATO, where budgets become battlegrounds and words give way to commitments. And if Trump demands 5% defense spending at that table too, the fireworks haven't even started. So don't blink, because what comes next could redraw the lines of alliance altogether. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your